And this assaulted sense of self is when the soul of one's being gets perpetually punctured and assaulted. It's the culmination of a massive onslaught of dignity assaults, both micro and macro. It's an overexposure to humiliation and dehumanization. It's what one gets as a living when we watch one of our extended selves lying in the middle of a cold street and a pool of warm blood turn cold like roadkill. It's dehumanizing. It's humiliating. It's an affront to one's sense of dignity. It is when one's definition of self is defined by someone else. It's when one sense of self is defined by what I am not rather than what I am. And so the therapist in me who sits with black families, I'm always struck by the fact that white parents talk in very glowing terms about what their children are and what their stellar accomplishments are. And black families feel compelled to talk about what our children are not. My son is not a bad kid. He's not in gangs. My son doesn't wear those baggy pants. This need to sort of address the ways in which our children are perpetually defined. So this assaulted sense of self is painful, enduring. It can be managed, but I'm not so sure it could be healed. I mean, if you were to imagine that for some odd reason, odd and very inexplicable reason, that each of us today came in here with a hammer and a nail, and we felt compelled to hammer the nail in the wall around here. And then it was pointed out to us how much damage was done to the wall by all these nails. And then we quickly regrouped and we went back and removed the nails from the wall. What remains are all the holes from the nails. That's what the assaulted sense of self is like for black people. There's a way in which it is buttressed by a lifelong exposure to devaluation, which is what happens when one is stripped of one's dignity, where respect is denied. There's also this untold story around voicelessness and the ways in which in our life that the voices of people of color are often silenced. I find with people of color that it's hard for us in settings like this to even say white, to name whiteness. We resort to code language like other people, some people, members of the dominant group, that we don't name it. And I understand why we don't name it, because we have a protracted history of really awful things happening when white people get uncomfortable. And so people of color won't name whiteness, and it is rare that white people name whiteness. And so we live in two worlds. We live in worlds where we're all racially socialized, and yet it's all different, because in this world of racial socialization, we're all racially socialized, that people of color know they're racially socialized, and white people don't. And so I often ask when I do workshops, ask people of color, at what age did you begin to think about yourself racially? And it's usually around 3 or 4. And when I ask white people that question, it could be my 20s, my 30s, graduate school, my first trip to Africa. And so I'm not suggesting that's problematic, but what it does, it speaks to a divide between us. Because if, on the one hand, if I've been thinking about it since I was 3, and you start thinking about it at 33, it now adds perspective to why you question me about why do I always bring up race. It makes the question much more understandable when you point out that I'm obsessed with race because I've had to live with it in a way that you haven't. And so there was a time in my life where I was always teetering on the precipice of massive reactivity. One white person said to me, "Why do you always have to speak about race? Why do you always have to bring up race? Why? I never had a good response. But now I do. I bring it up because you don't. And I solemnly swear to you, I'll bring it up less if you solemnly swear to bring it up more.